Primarily, criminals share a common objective: evade capture. Technological and forensic strides, like familial DNA, face recognition, and surveillance, have heightened the challenge for criminals. However, not every perpetrator faces consequences. Lack of witnesses, absence of traces, or insufficient law enforcement resources can result in cold cases. As time elapses, the difficulty of solving a case amplifies. Perpetrators might assume impunity, especially when decades pass without substantial evidence. Astonishingly, some criminals, burdened by guilt, eventually confess, providing closure for victims' families. This highlights top 10 criminals who finally confessed to their crimes decades later. Number 10. Brian Keith Hawkins. On May 7, 1993, Frank McAllister, age 19, was taken by his girlfriend Shannon Nicole Culver, her brother Curtis Culver, and Brian Keith Hawkins to a secluded area in Shingleton, California, supposedly for a methamphetamine sale. However, the intention was to rob McAllister of the $4,500 he received from a car crash settlement 2 months earlier. Hawkins and Curtis Culver stabbed McAllister to death, left his body in the woods, and took his money and vehicle back to Redding, abandoning it in a Costco parking lot. McAllister was reported missing, and though his vehicle was found, his remains weren't discovered until April 1994. About 25 years later, on January 9, 2018, Hawkins walked into the KRCR news station, confessing to McAllister's murder. He then went to the Redding Police Department, providing details and accomplice names. Arrests followed, with Hawkins stating he confessed due to finding God and the unbearable guilt. On November 26, 2019, Hawkins pleaded guilty and received a 25-year-to-life sentence. On January 14, 2022, the Culvers pleaded guilty to lesser charges, with Curtis sentenced to 35 years and Shanna to 20 years. Number 9. Thomas Randele. 20-year-old Ted Theodore Conrad, once a bank teller in Cleveland, Ohio, orchestrated a daring heist on the evening of July 11, 1969, making off with $215,000 in cash, equivalent to $1.7 million today. His disappearance before the missing funds were noticed led to the presumption of his demise by family and friends. Fueled by an obsession with the 1968 film The Thomas Crown Affair, Conrad embarked on a transformative, cross-country journey. By January 1970, he had established a new identity as Thomas Randele in Boston, Massachusetts, even forging a connection with an FBI agent. During the 1970s, the now Randele worked at a country club near Boston, evolving from an assistant golf pro to the club manager. In 1982, he married Kathy Mahan, starting a family and spending the subsequent 40 years in the car business, specializing in Land Rovers and Volvos until retirement. In a stunning turn, Randele, now 71 and battling lung cancer, confessed to his wife about the heist in May 2021. Only after his passing and the publication of his obituary did authorities crack the cold case. An anonymous tipster, prompted by the obituary's details, aided in connecting Randele to the robbery using signatures from a 2014 bankruptcy filing. In November 2021, U.S. Marshal Peter Elliott, continuing his father's legacy, visited Randele's Massachusetts residence, confirming Ted Conrad's identity through a posthumous admission from his widow, Kathy. Number 8. John Michael Irmer. Susan Marcia Rose, a 24-year-old native of Johnston, Pennsylvania, had relocated to Boston, Massachusetts. On October 30, 1979, Rose encountered John Michael Irmer at a local skating rink. After leaving, they entered an under-renovation apartment building, where Irmer unexpectedly attacked Rose with a hammer, leading to her tragic death. Subsequently, he committed a heinous act of rape. The next day, Irmer fled to New York. A different man faced trial and was acquitted of Rose's murder in June 1981, causing the case to go cold. However, in August 2023, 44 years after the incident, 68-year-old Irmer walked into the Portland, Oregon FBI field office and confessed to the brutal, ice-blooded murder and rape of Rose. During his admission, Irmer, who had previously served around 30 years in prison for another California killing, also confessed to an additional murder in a southern state. Following Irmer's confession, investigators collected a DNA sample from him, which matched the DNA preserved from the crime scene. On September 11, 2023, Irmer was formally charged with murder and aggravated rape in a Boston courtroom. Number 7. David Zandstra. In the early hours of August 15, 1975, 8-year-old Gretchen Harrington, en route to Bible camp in Marble Township, Pennsylvania, walked alone due to family circumstances. Reverend David Zandstra, a clergyman and father to one of Gretchen's friends, noticed her and offered a ride. Tragically, Gretchen never made it to the camp. Exploiting the isolated situation, Zandstra drove Gretchen to a wooded area. When she resisted his inappropriate advances and refused to undress, he violently beat her to death, callously discarding her remains in Ridley Creek State Park. Shockingly, Zandstra returned to the church, concealing the gruesome act, reporting Gretchen missing and actively participating in the search. Despite being interviewed about Gretchen's disappearance, Zandstra denied involvement and evaded further scrutiny. Gretchen's lifeless body was found on October 14, 1975, with Zandstra conducting her funeral. The case remained dormant for decades. A breakthrough occurred on January 2, 2023, as investigators interviewed one of Gretchen's former classmates. The woman, a close friend of Zandstra's daughter, recounted disturbing incidents during sleepovers and shared her 1975 diary mentioning Mr. Z as a potential kidnapper. Pennsylvania State Police traveled to Marietta, Georgia, where 83-year-old Zandstra lived, leading to a confession 48 years later. On July 14, 2023, Zandstra was arrested, facing charges of criminal homicide, first, second, and third-degree murder, kidnapping of a minor, and possession of an instrument of crime. Number 6. John Paul. When 42-year-old Anthony Bird, a porter and part-time barman, failed to appear at the Railway Tap pub in London on June 6, 1980, police were summoned to his one-bedroom flat. There, Bird was discovered naked, his wrist bound with a black electrical cable. The flat had been ransacked, with stolen electrical items and alcohol. Despite forensic examinations and interviews with neighbors, the case went unsolved for 41 years. In a startling twist on May 5, 2021, 61-year-old John Paul of Ladbroke Grove, Kensington, walked into Hammersmith Police Station, confessing to the killing. Paul claimed that on the evening of June 3, 1980, Bird propositioned him for sex, leading to a robbery where Bird was tied up and brutally beaten. Paul's fingerprints matched those found at the crime scene, but despite his confession, he later denied the murder and manslaughter charges at trial. On November 4, 2022, Paul was sentenced to a minimum of 19 years in jail. Number 5. Glen Samuel McCurley. 17-year-old Carla Walker and her boyfriend, Rodney McCurley, attended a Valentine's Day dance at Western Hills High School on February 17, 1974 in Fort Worth, Texas. Following the dance, they visited a Taco Bell and then the Wrigley Bowl bowling alley for restroom use. However, in the bowling alley parking lot, a man abducted Walker, sexually assaulting her and later murdered her. Her body was discovered on February 20, 1974 near Benbrook Lake. Glen Samuel McCurley became a suspect due to his possession of a .22 caliber Ruger pistol, matching a magazine found near the crime scene. Despite being an ex-convict and residing close to the location, he denied involvement, attributing his missing gun to theft during a fishing trip. With limited evidence and technology at the time, the case remained unsolved. Advances in technology allowed for the creation of a DNA profile, pointing to a suspect with the last name McCurley. In July 2020, detectives obtained DNA from Glen Samuel McCurley's trash, confirming a match with the DNA on Walker's clothes. Arrested on September 22, 2020, McCurley, now 77, initially maintained his innocence, but later issued a written confession on August 24, 2021 during his trial. He received a life sentence, but passed away from natural causes in custody in July 2023. Number 4. Karl Smith. In March 2003, a gunman opened fire in Chicago's Uptown neighborhood, killing Antoine Carter and injuring Ronnie Bolden. Bolden identified the shooter as Twin, a street name used by Kevin Duger and his twin brother Karl Smith, both involved in drugs and gangs. Despite impersonating each other, Karl had adopted their mother's maiden name. In 2005, Duger was convicted and sentenced to 54 years for the crime, maintaining his innocence. A decade later, Karl, then incarcerated, confessed in a letter to Duger, admitting he was the actual perpetrator. Duger, initially silent, eventually asked him to communicate with his attorney. In 2018, a judge deemed Karl's confession not credible, considering his recent denial of an appeal for a violent home invasion. On appeal, a different judge reviewed the confession, leading to Duger's release on January 26, 2022, after nearly 20 years in prison. He was slated to reside in a transitional facility for 90 days as part of his release conditions. Number 3. Scott Frederick Fenner. Around 8 a.m. on June 2, 2012, Scott Frederick Fenner, 59, discovered his wife, 50-year-old Debbie Lyons Fenner, dead in their Lodi Township, Michigan home. The police, responding to the scene, found prescription bottles in an open beer next to her bed. No signs of trauma were evident, and a medical examiner attributed Fenner's death to a drug overdose exacerbated by alcohol use, although the exact cause remained unclear. More than a decade later, on July 31, 2023, Fenner walked into the Green Oak Township Police Department and confessed to killing his wife as an assisted suicide. Fenner asserted that Fenner, grappling with various health issues, had discussed the prospect of her passing. He claimed to have researched painless methods to assist her, committing the act between 2:30 and 3:30 a.m., but delaying reporting her death. Fenner cited the guilt over the incident, which had plagued him for 11 years, leading to drug abuse and mental health struggles. Facing a terminal illness, he was attempting to reconcile his actions. Fenner was arraigned on August 3, 2023, and is now charged with open murder, potentially facing life in prison without parole, if convicted of first or second-degree murder. Number 2. Joseph George Sutherland. 45-year-old Susan Tice, a family therapist and mother of 4 teenagers, was tragically found dead in her Toronto home on August 17, 1983. Tice had been sexually assaulted and fatally stabbed. A similar fate befell 22-year-old Erin Gilmore, an aspiring fashion designer and daughter of mining tycoon David Gilmore, discovered dead in her Toronto apartment on December 20, 1983, also subjected to sexual assault and fatal stabbing. Initially investigated separately, the murders of Tice and Gilmore were only linked in 2000, when DNA profiles from each scene matched. Despite technological advances, no suspect emerged until 2021, when genetic genealogy implicated 5 brothers from the Sutherland family. After eliminating 4 brothers, 61-year-old Joseph George Sutherland of Moosonee, Ontario, emerged as the sole person of interest. Following a warrant for DNA collection, Sutherland confessed to a friend, a retired OPP officer, before the results were available. The friend promptly contacted the police, leading to Sutherland's arrest on November 24, 2022. Charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, Sutherland is set to be sentenced on December 14, 2023. Number 1. Tony Peralta. 69-year-old William Bill Blodgett of Roswell, New Mexico, disappeared on Christmas Eve 2008, and his son reported him missing on January 3, 2009. Despite an extensive search, including his home, neighborhood, and the use of a cadaver dog, no trace of Blodgett was found. His vehicle remained at home, belongings untouched, and no bank withdrawals occurred. A potential lead emerged when a witness mentioned Blodgett, accusing his tenant, Tony Peralta, of theft. Despite interviews with Peralta and the cadaver dog yielding no results, the case went cold. However, on May 1, 2023, Peralta, in his 20s, confessed to Blodgett's murder at a gas station parking lot. He claimed meth addiction drove him to kill Blodgett for money, directing officers to the buried body in Blodgett's house. A search revealed bones, a boot, and dentures, positively identified as Blodgett's. Peralta, initially charged with first-degree murder, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, receiving a 15-year prison sentence after initially pleading not guilty through his public defender.